As the owner of a law firm, you have to recognize that what you measure magnifies. And if you want to magnify the number of new clients that retain your firm, the thing that you have to measure is your sales funnel. Inside of your sales funnel, you have two fundamental parts: intake and initial consultation. If you want better results in your law firm's new client attraction pipeline, you must measure both your intake and your initial consultation sales pipeline. They both need to be measured differently, and they have to be measured in order for you to magnify your results. So, the first thing I want you to pay attention to when you're looking at intake is recognize that a tracking system is absolutely necessary. Now, you can see there are 8 different items that I actually want to look at tracking if you have an intake team. So this assumes that you have inbound calls coming in and you have leads coming in via form fills. You're getting a lead coming in, but they didn't call you. Your team needs to reach out to them via text, social media, email, phone, and schedule an appointment. Now, for full disclosure, AI can handle some of this, and you should certainly look into that as an augmentation to your teams. But AI alone doesn't get it done. You still need an appointment setting specialist. And so, for this appointment setting agent, you have to manage them and you have to measure them. We have to make sure we're doing this by date. So what we do is we make sure that they're using the separate sheet that they're reporting on a daily basis. And the first thing that they'll enter for us is how many dials did they have that day? And they should be able to get that very simply from your VoIP dialing system. If you don't have a VoIP dialing system, hey, the early 2000s are calling, they're asking for their old phone system back. The other thing that we have to do is we have to look at the number of inbound dials. If you have a big enough team or a big enough flow of leads, you might have a specialist making nothing but outbound calls. You might have a specialist handling inbound calls. That's okay. It kind of depends on where you're at in your lead flow numbers, but you still have to be tracking how many outbound dials are making, how many inbound calls they're receiving. And then you have to talk about how many actual connections they had, because just because they made a call, just because they received a call, doesn't mean it's an actual connection. Sometimes inbound calls are nothing but robodialers and are not actually a connection. So a connection is described as somebody you actually had a conversation with that was calling the law firm about something in particular regarding law, not necessarily a sales opportunity, right? Then we're asking ourselves, how many of those were non-qualified? This is super important, especially if you have more than one appointment setting agent. You have to determine whether one is setting better than the other. And if you don't track non-quals, you will always have reps saying, hey, well, all my leads were non-quals this week, or they were lousy leads. That's why my set rate was down. You have to be able to track non-quals, which means non-quals need manager override to approve that they actually were a non-qual. What you should be tracking is at least the number of non-qualified leads that came in. What's a non-qualified? Well, it depends on practice area. If you're a family law firm, maybe indigent, don't get through the door. If they're calling for a practice area that you don't offer, they're non-qual. If they're in a jurisdiction you can't help them with, they're a non-qual, right? Then we're tracking how many sets they get. That's the basic goal. And if you hot transfer, every one of their calls that are qualified should be a set. I don't love hot transfers for many firms. There are some firms that it can work for, but it's got to be the right firm under the right circumstances. Most firms simply can't handle it. Finally, we have to look at our abandonment rate. So this is the number of calls that called into the firm and they got dropped because they got put on hold or somebody didn't get to them quick enough or they rolled over to the answering service and they left. That's an abandoned call. And if you have a high volume firm, paying attention to your abandon rate numbers is huge, especially if you're running mass media like TV or radio or major social media blasts or something where you're driving a lot of calls all at once. You have to track that. If you want more information about how to acquire an appointment setting agent or a non-attorney salesperson, visit us at thestaffingroom.com. We specialize in this technique. So by all means, schedule a call with us. Years ago, when I built a law firm in Phoenix, actually ran a TV ad during the Olympics, believe it or not. And we had over 350 leads come in on one ad. But I got to tell you, I knew that was going to happen and I had to prepare for it. So I had multiple answering services come together and connect and link them together to be able to handle that volume, because our phone team and our answering service couldn't handle it alone just because it's math. By the way, we still had a 15% abandonment rate, despite the fact that I was able to link all of these answering services together. Had I not linked those together, my abandonment rate might have been north of 50 or 60%, which means I would have spent a bunch of money on that ad to the tune of $8,000 for a single ad. And I may not have gotten any results or the results that I wanted. But because I did pay attention to my abandonment rate and I did have capacity set up, I was able to convert at a much higher number. Finally, we want to look at talk time. So for an intake agent, people ask me all the time, what should their talk time be? And what I tell everybody is that it should be about 180 minutes, about 3 hours of talk time in the course of a day. You're like, but Rich, we pay them for 8 hours a day. They're only talking 3 hours a day. Yeah, that's actual talk time. If you want to improve their talk time and get their talk time to reach like the 70, 80, 90% range, you need to put them on a dialer, which means you have to be a big enough firm to have the leads you need to be able to have them on a dialer. And you may or may not be big enough to do that. Most firms aren't. And so you're probably not going to invest into a dialer where you're keeping them on the phone over and over and over again all day long. You'll probably burn through more leads than you have. And your firm just probably isn't big enough because you don't have somebody to manage it. It's just a whole other complicated scenario. But that's what call centers do. The way that they increase their talk time per agent is they keep them on a dialer. That helps them maximize the amount of revenue that they could run through a particular appointment setting agent is by having them on talk time more often. When you're using manual dial situations, they pick up the phone when it rings, or they dial out to a lead, or they're texting somebody, or they're emailing somebody to get them to get on the phone, or they're going through social media to connect with them. If they're doing a hybrid of that, you're looking for about that 3 hour talk time sweet spot. And ultimately, you're looking at what is their set rate, what is their show rate. To be clear, you look at their set rate by looking at how many connections they had minus how many non-quals they had. That gives you their true connections. And you divide the sets by that number, that gives you your set rate. And so when you have this data, you can determine what your set rate is by rep, whether their talk time is affecting things or not affecting things. You can determine whether you had an abandonment rate issue based on that rep because of people being on the phone or not on the phone, and you have a capacity issue. This is really important data for you to measure when you're in the intake. Now, once you're in intake, they're transferring over to the next conversation, which is the initial consultation, right? And so you have to track this data separately. So this is where the salesperson is actually sitting in on the virtual meeting or the in-person meeting, hopefully not over the phone. That's the worst type of meeting you could have. It should be over video conferencing or in person or an in-person hybrid. But whatever the case may be, we track it the same way. They need to let us know what their date was that we're dealing with, how many initial consultations they had on the calendar. Super important. It's one thing to look at a CRM to figure it out. It's another thing to be able to look at the calendar. Calendars tell the real truth about what the capacity is for the day, how many were actually on the calendar, and what was the actual show rate for that day. And then of the people that were on the calendar, how many showed? That tells you fundamentally your show rate. Because even if they rescheduled, it doesn't matter. They still didn't actually show up on the calendar that day. And then, of course, were there non-quals? You might say, well, Rich, what's a non-qual during initial consultation? It depends on practice area. What is the practice area that you're in, and how do you determine non-quals? When you have more than one rep, if you tell them their close rate is off, but they tell you all their leads sucked for the week, the only way for you to know that is to know what their non-qual rate was. And if their non-quals weren't there, then their close rate is what their close rate is. If they do have non-quals, then they're right. We have a marketing problem issue. Now, of course, all non-quals need to be justified by management, because when somebody marks an on-call, it makes their close rate or their set rate artificially go up. So management has to review on non-quals. Then, of course, we mark how many people hired, language for retain the firm. The next thing they want to track is your case value. And the next thing you want to track is your average money down. So using a non-attorney salesperson, the primary goal is the ability to increase your close rate, to gain consistency so you don't have super high highs and super low lows. You increase your average money down in your case value, because sales reps will close at whatever price you tell them to close at. So you gain price elasticity. Also, you'll improve the amount of cash that you get down if you reward them and judge them based on their average cash down. Now, in a contingency-based firm, there is no money down. But in a flat fee firm, the average money down is a super important data point. More money we get received up front, the less payment plans we have and the less we have to chase money. And really what we're looking for is as many paid in fulls as possible. That comes back to scripting and a whole other training structure. But suffice it to say, if you're not measuring it as a manager, it's impossible for you to be able to identify whether it's working or not. What measures gets magnified. Somebody's got to be measuring this, inspecting that they're actually entering this data into the sheet and reviewing it with your either appointment setting agent or your non-attorney sales closer so that they know what they're doing. So as trainers, if you don't have this data, you can't walk alongside them to help them improve. You just go, it's not working. What's not working? Exactly. You have to manage your appointment setting agent. You have to manage your non-attorney salesperson. You have to have a trainer train your appointment setting agent and your non-attorney salesperson. If you don't, this isn't going to work for you long term. If you own a law firm and you want to magnify your new client attraction pipeline, you need to measure your data. If you want more information about how to acquire an appointment setting agent or a non-attorney salesperson, visit us at thestaffingroom.com. We specialize in this technique. So by all means, schedule a call with us. But regardless, whether we staff this person for you, staff it on your own, make sure you're measuring what's going on so you can magnify your results.